Well, we've always heard about the evangelical church standing with Israel and how evangelical Christians are Israel's best friends. Is that changing?
It's time for The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Michael Brown is the director of the Coalition of Conscience and president of Fire School of Ministry. Get into The Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
As I speak with you this week from the United States, a conference is taking place in Bethlehem. That's the birthplace of Jesus, called Christ at the Checkpoint, which, among many noble goals it may have, will also paint Israel in the worst possible light in terms of, quote, the occupation, and words like apartheid and ethnic cleansing might even be used in the midst of the conference. And yet it is a, quote, Christian conference. What are we to make of it? And what about evangelical support for Israel? Michael Brown, welcome to The Line of Fire. Number to call, 866-34-TRUTH. That's 866-348-7884. My guest is David Brog. He is the executive director of Christians United for Israel, CUFI, which you've probably heard of in association with the name of Pastor John Hagee. Before serving in this position, he worked in the United States Senate for 7 years, rising to be chief of staff to Senator Arlen Specter and staff director of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He's also served as an executive of America Online, practiced corporate law in Tel Aviv, Israel, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Brog is the author of Standing with Israel, Why Christians Support the Jewish State, and In Defense of Faith, the Judeo-Christian Idea and the Struggle for Humanity. And check this out, 2007, the Forward newspaper listed Brog in its Forward 50 most influential Jews in America. He's a graduate of Princeton University and Harvard Law School. Hey, David, that's a pretty impressive bio. Congratulations, man.
Well, thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. Just goes to show you it's possible to go to some good schools and not be entirely misdirected.
Yeah, that can actually happen. Amazingly so. And we can talk about that a bit later, campuses and where they stand on Israel. But, David, I think this is a great opportunity for you and I to model something. We are Jews with different religious beliefs, different beliefs about Jesus. Your organization that you work with Pastor Hagee, does things day and night that are absolutely dear to my heart. But I'm also reaching out to Jewish people to tell them about Jesus and working closely with Jewish believers in the land, and Pastor Hagee working with Christians more on an international level, etc. So we could say we have all these differences, or we could say there are core life and death issues that unite us and that we must stand for. And this is what we have to do in calling Christians together to stand for Israel. So just to introduce things, David, what is the mission and purpose of CUFI, and how do you, as a Jewish man, fit in the midst of all these Christians?
Well, thanks, Michael. And you know what I love about what I do, and what I appreciate so much about you and your having me on today, is that we can focus on what we share, just like you said. There are theological differences between Jews and Christians. Primarily, we disagree about the identity of the Messiah. God knows we have obsessed and stressed that difference far too deeply for far too long. We can also focus on what we share, and we can also join hands on those issues where we agree. Christians United for Israel is very much a policy education-oriented ministry. It is not a ministry that seeks to share the gospel. It is a ministry that seeks to educate Christians about Israel and the imperatives of standing with Israel, and then to activate Christians to speak out on behalf of Israel in our churches, communities, and before the Congress. For this unique mission, our board, including Pastor Hagee, decided that it was fine and proper to have a Jewish man like me, both genetically and theologically Jewish, involved. My career was on Capitol Hill. Prior to that, I lived in Israel. And I wrote my book, really stressing Christian theology. And so this is one area where we agree and can work together.
All right, tell you what, we'll keep working on you on the Jesus end, David. Don't worry about that. But we come back, I want to get to a very important article you wrote in the Middle East Quarterly, the end of evangelical support for Israel.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to the Line of Fire broadcast. My guest, David Brog, Executive Director of CUFI, Christians United for Israel. David, you recently wrote an article for the Middle East Quarterly, The End of Evangelical Support for Israel. I found it to be a tremendous article, well-informed, clearly presented, but also ending with hope in terms of where Christians are standing. But is there an erosion of evangelical support for Israel? And are Christian leaders and Christian young people believing the narrative of the evil Israeli occupiers and based on that, lessening their support for Israel?
Yes, Michael. Yes to the erosion. Yes to the gullibility of a young generation being fed a black and white anti-Israel narrative and believing it. The good news is, though, as you note, we are seeing the trend early enough that we can make a difference. And some folks were disappointed. I wrote the article. They said, "Hey, everyone believes all evangelicals support Israel. Don't go sharing the dirty secret that some evangelicals are critics of Israel. It might diminish the aura of our power in Washington or beyond." I don't think that's how you solve problems. I think the opposite. You solve a problem by making people aware of a problem, and when done best, you do it early so you can solve the problem. We lost the mainline Protestant denominations. Today, the extent to which the Presbyterians or the Methodists or the Anglicans act in connection to Israel, it's to divest from Israel, not to support Israel. And it's from Israel, not Iran, that they seek to divest. If we don't want a repeat of that tragedy, we have to sound the alarm now while the phenomenon is clear and worrisome, but while there's still plenty of time to fight back.
Okay, why is it then that so many evangelicals had just kind of a gut-level connection to Israel, believe that the Jewish people back in the land was fulfillment of prophecy, and many in the younger generation of evangelical Christians are not getting it? Was it merely that these older Christians had this prophetic idea that Jews are going to be regathered and Jesus is going to come, and this is the sign, and now it's not panning out like that, and therefore there's disappointment or disillusionment? Or is it just believing one part of a narrative now? And what's causing the shifts, in your opinion?
Well, this is a fascinating generation we're talking about. I'm talking about the millennial generation. They tend to be people who are now between the ages of 20 and 30, even 35 could be considered millennials. College age, grad school age, early years of careers. And they're a very interesting generation, and we see this both in the evangelical community, also to some extent in the Jewish community. They're independent. They ask tough questions. And this independent streak in the evangelical world has boiled down to something that I think could be healthy. They're not accepting the political positions of their parents. They're saying that being a follower of Jesus does not mean being a right-wing Republican. And frankly, I think that kind of questioning, that kind of political reexamination can be a healthy thing. The problem is it also opens them up to those willing to exploit their openness. So we see a generation that they call themselves, they say they're less biblically literal than their parents. Just because the Bible says something, they're not going to take it literally. They're also going to take their values, which they believe come from the Bible, and the example of Jesus, which comes from the Bible, and they're going to use the example and the ideas and test the biblical literal lines against the larger principles. And so you see an older generation, Pastor Hagee, for example, was very literal. It says, "He who blesses Israel will be blessed, and he who curses Israel will be cursed." Well, he wanted to bless Israel. And it speaks about the return of the Jews from the four corners of the earth to their land. And when that played out in his lifetime, he saw that as an act of God. There was no dissuading him from that this was God's will. The younger generation is going to say, okay, it says he who blesses Israel should be blessed. But hold on a minute, wait a second. What does it mean to bless Israel? If Israel is acting poorly, do I necessarily have to support them? and they want to examine the facts on the ground and then determine for themselves which side is just, which side is not, and what Jesus would have done. And they know that Jesus had a great compassion for the oppressed and the downtrodden. They want to figure out for themselves who's oppressing whom. All of these things could be fair, could be good. The problem is it creates an opening, it creates a wedge through which a lot of people with a lot of money are coming and teaching lies about Israel. They're saying Israel's the oppressor, the Palestinians are the oppressed, and it's the story's being told in a superficial way that can convince a lot of people who don't know better.
Right.
What we on our side have to do is teach a lot of history, and in
Exactly.
these days it takes time.
Exactly. And what I find with the younger generation, there is a siding with the perceived victim, the one that's being bullied. So, for example, you'll have younger people overwhelmingly saying that they favor redefining marriage and 2 men or 2 women should be able to marry. Yeah. And a lot of what fuels that is there was a real nice gay kid in their class that was bullied. And
exactly.
so they will have, on the one hand, a good heart for the oppressed and for the victim without filtering it through larger moral questions and the implications of redefining marriage. So the same way, if you just come into the narrative and you see this wall and it's affecting tourism and it's affecting our livelihood and it's divided our family one from the other, and you got the Israelis with the machine guns standing there, well, that, you know who the victim is. When you look at the larger story and realize that a security fence with some parts, tiny parts being a wall, 3 or 4%, that a security fence was put up to keep murderers out and to keep snipers from killing men, women, and children, the narrative changes. But a lot of young people are not getting the larger picture. Now you mentioned people with a lot of money. George Soros has become very well known as a billionaire who has funded some of the most radical left-wing political groups in America. Is he tied in any way to the Israel issue?
Yeah, he absolutely is. There is a group called the Telos Group, T-E-L-O-S, and they take what they claim to be 15 groups of young evangelical influencers, millennial generation Christian leaders, to what they call Israel and Palestine every year. Now, I've seen their itineraries. I know, and I've heard the feedback of folks coming back from the trip. And it's a very smart trip, right? They bring young leaders over there, and the young leaders meet with Arabs and Israelis. They meet with Christians, Muslims, and Jews. But all of them share the same perspective on the conflict, which is it's all Israel's fault. So the Palestinian Muslims and Christians they meet with are going to blame it all on Israel. And then they'll meet with some Israeli Jews who are part of the Peace Now movement. Israel is a democracy. You have Israeli Jews who are highly critical of the country. And the Israeli Jews are more or less going to share the narrative. It's all Israel's fault. But the level of dishonesty gets troubling. Some of the money involved in this has been used to make films that are critical of Israel, like a film called With God on Our Side or one called Christ at the Checkpoint. And like you mentioned, they'll talk about this wall, which is mostly a fence. They'll talk about Israel's apartheid wall without ever once mentioning the Intifada, without ever once mentioning the wave of suicide bombings that blew up Jewish buses, cafes, and restaurants, killing over 1,000 Israelis, Jews and Arabs, by the way, that forced Israel to try to build a fence between it and those attacking it. That's simply a lie. You can't discuss the wall without discussing the terrorism that caused Israelis to decide to build the wall, just like you couldn't discuss our barrier fence with parts of Mexico without discussing the problem of illegal immigration that caused us to build it. But in the absence of that context, the students coming on these trips are left to think Israel simply did it because they woke up one morning and wanted to make life difficult for the Palestinians. And they didn't want any Arabs in their midst. As you know, the wall separates Israelis, Arabs and Jews, Muslims, Christians, and Jews, from West Bank Palestinians who want their own state, who are not citizens of the State of Israel. It does not separate Jews from Arabs.
All right. What about a statement like this? Jesus was a Palestinian who would be suffering under Israeli occupation today. We've got about a minute. Give me your response to that. What troubles you about that?
What troubles me about that is it's an ongoing effort to de-Judaize Jesus and to instead make him a prop in Palestinian propaganda. So we're getting again into the neighborhood. Again, there's fair criticism of Israel. There's a fair debate about what should be done to achieve peace. What's unfair is lying about the conflict, blaming it on one side. So when you de-Judaize Jesus, when you turn him into a Palestinian, and claim that the Israeli occupation is somehow akin to the Roman occupation, you're taking a complex conflict where Israelis have made tough choices to defend themselves from terror, and you're turning it into some evil force versus a purely good force. It's lying about the conflict, unfortunately, and not knowing better. A lot of our young people are believing it.
Got it. All right, we'll be right back with David Brog, Executive Director of Christians United for Israel, CUFI. Very important to separate fact from fiction when it comes to Israel and the Palestinians.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
They are the descendants of those early followers of Christ, yet few are even aware of their existence.
It's very important that all the Christian locations do not just become archaeological sites or museums. The living aspect of Christianity in Palestine is disappearing.
All right, that is from the movie The Stones Cry Out, which points to the plight of Palestinian Christians and basically places the blame for their suffering at the feet of the people of Israel. My guest, David Brog, Executive Director of Christians United for Israel. David, you lived in Israel. You've practiced law in that context. You've worked in the Senate. You're now working with Christian leaders around the world, with Israeli leaders right up to Prime Minister Netanyahu. Can you honestly say that Israel is guiltless, blameless in its dealing with the Palestinians? Or are there things that we should acknowledge that are wrong to help in the pursuit of justice? Or is it that the charges are so blown out of proportion and the role of radical Islam ignored that it's almost hard to admit wrong without playing into the larger anti-Israel narrative?
Well, I think you're right. It is hard to admit wrong without playing into the narrative, but I also think it's important to admit it. Israel is a government of men, and like any government of men is fallible and has made mistakes. And I think we can review Israeli history and point to junctures where they've made mistakes. We can view Israeli military operations and point out their mistakes. You know, when Israel went into Gaza to stop missile fire, it fired on a home that intelligence told them was a storage place for Hamas missiles. It ended up being bad intelligence, and they harmed innocent civilians. They killed innocent civilians. So again, we can point to mistakes in the small picture and the big picture. The problem, though, as you point out, is that's exactly what Israel's enemies want us to do. They want us to focus on Israel's mistake and miss the big picture. The analogy I would make, Michael, is that when it comes to America's conflict with al-Qaeda, when it comes to our battle with the Taliban, we too have made mistakes. We too have killed innocents by accident. And yet, when it comes down to it, my faith doesn't call on me to be neutral in the battle between the U.S. and al-Qaeda. My faith calls on me to take sides, to take the side of justice. And the side of justice in this example is the side that is trying to punish and harm the wicked while sparing the innocent. We may make mistakes, but our effort is not to harm innocents. When innocents are harmed, we don't celebrate and hand out sweets, we mourn. I see Israel very much the same way. Israel is struggling to survive against enemies determined to destroy it. It has made mistakes in the effort to survive, but when these mistakes happen, they're not celebrated, they're mourned. When you look at Hezbollah, you look at Hamas, you look at al-Qaeda, it's very different. Their goal is to harm the innocent. Their goal is to kill the innocent, and when they succeed in doing so, they celebrate. A lot of people look at what they see as the occupation, Israel's occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, and again, that's without knowing history, they just say, boy, why is Israel occupying Palestinian land? Again, just like with the fence wasn't built to harm Palestinians. It was built to protect Israelis, Jewish and Arab, Christian, Jewish, and Muslim, from terrorism. When you look at the history of Israel's conflict with the Palestinians, you see over and over again proposals have been made to divide the land. People say, hey, there are two people claiming the same piece of land, split it. Jews get part, Arabs get part. Over and over again, 5 times, if not more, the Israelis have said, okay, we'll do it. We'd like it all, but we're willing to compromise and take half a loaf. Over and over again, the Palestinian leadership, and I blame the leadership more than the people, have said, no, we won't split it. We will not accept a Jewish state in any size, shape, or form. We say no. And not only do we say no, often the no comes in the form of missiles and bombs. Therefore, if you see the occupation, some see it and say, hey, that's Judea and Samaria. It's the biblical heartland. It's a strategic heartland. Israel has every right to be there. Others say, no, Israel shouldn't be there. But even if you're of the school that says, no, Israel shouldn't be there, it's very hard for me to blame Israel for its ongoing presence there, because Israel has offered time after time to leave. But like any other country,
what about the settlements? You know, I'm on your side on these things, but I want to raise these things. Palestinian Authority has made clear that if there's to be a Palestinian state, it would be, to use the German word, Judenrein, free of any Jews. And yet there are more settlements. Those are often said this is the number one obstacle to peace, and it's hurting Palestinians, and it's taking their land away from them. So we can get started on this and then come back after the break. But just in short, what's the truth about the settlement from your perspective?
Well, 2 things. First of all, like you say, 20% of Israel's population is Arab. So anyone who thinks this is a purely, blood-based society where only Jews are allowed, they're mistaken. Israel's 20% Arab. Jews want to live in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. When you read your Bible, everything that takes place there takes place in the hill country, Judea, Samaria, not in the coast where most of Israelis live today. Jews say, of all places on earth, why should these areas be Judenrein? Why should these areas be banned, as far as Jews living there? And they want to live there. And that, to me, is an understandable desire. Is it a barrier to peace? It's discussed that way. And the way the settlements are discussed, you would think they take up maybe, 20, 30, 40% of the land of the West Bank that the Palestinians want for a state. It's not true. It's more like 3 or 4% of the land. Every leader on both sides understands that there are certain blocks of settlements Israel would keep in a peace deal. And every leader on each side understands that if there were a peace deal, Israel would cede actual territory from Israel in compensation for the land of the settlement blocks that were kept. This isn't a barrier to peace. It's just a distraction. This 2 or 3 or 4% isn't the core. The core, when you look over the history, the reason that the conflict persists is the Arab refusal to accept a Jewish state in any
right, and going back to the partition plan in 47.
Even earlier.
Yeah, and of course, that being the key one where you could have had 2-state solution that was put on the table. We'll be right back with a lot more with David Brog. I want to ask him, what do we make of images of Israelis bulldozing houses and Palestinian Christians saying, look, we're Christians, we love Jesus, we love justice, but we're being mistreated, and evangelicals are fueling the fire of that mistreatment. More with David Brog on the other side of the break. Let me strongly encourage you to get a special package we put together. I did a DVD lecture on Is Israel an Evil Occupier? I was reviewing some of it last night at University of South Florida. It lays things out crystal clear with PowerPoint, with illustrations, and with Q&A from some of the Palestinians and Muslims that were in the audience. The DVD, together with my book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, the most translated book I've ever written. The 2 together, $25 postage paid, which is a good savings as well. You'll find these eye-opening, and you'll want to distribute them to your friends. So call now, 1-800-278-9978, 1-800-278-9978. Oh, just a reminder, today's the last day you can download your free ebook of Hyper Grace. Don't miss the opportunity.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, activist, author, international speaker, and theologian, Dr. Michael Brown. your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Get into the line of fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
Welcome back, friends, to the Line of Fire broadcast, 866-34-TRUTH. My guest, David Brog, who is the executive director of Christians United for Israel, which is founded and led by Pastor John Hagee. As I said at the beginning of the show, this gives me a great opportunity to interact with someone. We are both Jews. I'm a follower of Jesus. David is not. There are specific things that Christians United for Israel would emphasize, and I might emphasize other things. And yet, when it comes to the call to stand together with Israel, to recognize God's purposes for Israel, to recognize that it is right for Christians to bless Israel and also undo some of the horrors of Christian anti-Semitism in the past, while treating all people with equality and justice in the Middle East, David and I are united shoulder to shoulder, heart to heart, to stand for these things. David, the reason that I especially wanted to bring you on the air with me this week was not just because of your wonderful article, The End of Evangelical Support for Israel. You asked some very probing questions. You share some very disturbing information, and yet you give hope, and you point out to the many things that Christians United for Israel is doing around the world and in America. But I want you to hear a clip, David. This is from a poet, author, activist, Remy Kanazi, and he's giving a Palestinian perspective, and this is one we're hearing more and more and more about, all of the injustice, all of Israel's grievous actions against the Palestinians. And as I mentioned, this week is the Christ at the Checkpoint Conference in Israel, where movies like The Stones Cry Out will be shown, and where, from my perspective, those attending will get a very biased, harsh view on Israel. Just listen to these words. They'll fade out at a certain point, but you'll get what Remy is talking about.
Great.
Go ahead, number 8, Joey.
Nothing is normal about occupation. Nothing normal about apartheid, ethnic cleansing, siege, blockade, settler-only roads, bombing water wells, schools, mosques, and UN buildings. Nothing normal about putting a civilian population on a diet, paying non-indigenous foreigners to settle land that is already populated, rewriting the Nakba with each stolen childhood.
All right. Passionate details. Interact with that. We'll come back and have some more time, but take a couple of minutes and interact with that, because
Sure.
You as a Jew, me as a Jewish follower of Jesus, we care about justice for all people.
That's right. That's right.
What about these charges?
And, I think a lot of people make the mistake of thinking being pro-Israel means somehow being anti-Palestinian. I don't believe that is the case. I've noticed more the opposite, frankly. I think those who are pro-Palestinian have a hatred towards Israel. And if you listen to the man who just spoke, there was a hatred there, an anger there. Palestinians have suffered in this conflict. I think one has to be a fool to deny that. But Elie Wiesel, I think, put it best. He said Palestinians have every right to be angry, but they should be angry at their parents, not at Israel. And what he meant by that was, just like you said before the break, in 1948 there could have been two states for two people. In Israel, much smaller than present-day Israel, by the way, and an Arab Palestinian state, much larger than the West Bank and Gaza. The Jews said yes to the UN partition plan. Not only did they say yes, they danced in the streets for joy. And by the way, this Jewish state on offer did not include Jerusalem or its Jewish majority, neither. The Palestinians not only said no, but they went to war the very next morning to try to destroy the Jewish state before it could be born. So if you don't like the occupation, you don't like the absence of a Palestinian state, you might want to blame that generation. I would update Elie Wiesel, by the way.
All right, tell you what, we come back, you'll update Elie Wiesel, and the big question is, refugee crisis, issues like that, whose fault is it? Why is there a refugee crisis in the Middle East?
Fire we want, fire we please. Stand the fire.
It's the Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown. Get into the Line of Fire now by calling 866-34-TRUTH. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
I don't want to indulge your amnesia about a glorious past. Have a therapy session on two sides with equal grievances. The only thing barren is your moral capacity, blooming a settler colonial state with appropriated culture. I will not fight for your privilege, nor will I seek to normalize it. It's not just the occupation, stupid. It's the right of return, equality for all Palestinians. It's a transformation from a racist, exclusivist, supremacist state to a nation for all of its...
All right, again, the voice of poet, activist, author Remy Kanazi speaking out against the modern state of Israel and speaking on behalf of fellow Palestinians. My guest, David Brog, Executive Director of Christians United for Israel, serving with Pastor John Hagee. That is CUFI. And David, we were chatting before the show. We might have different prophetic perspectives, or Pastor Hagee and I may see the four blood moons differently or things like that. But that's also secondary to these really life and death issues with the state of Israel and the importance of Christians standing with Israel. I mean, I can't underscore how massively important it is, especially in light of church history, where the church was often on the wrong side of Israel and the Jewish people, and the persecutor and the hater. And without the seeds of Christian anti-Semitism that were breeding in Europe for centuries, you couldn't have had a Holocaust take place without that hostility towards the Jews that had been breeded for a long time. So these, to me, are life and death issues. I know you and Pastor Hagee feel passionately about these as well. You said that you wanted to update what Elie Wiesel said, that if Palestinians are upset, they should be upset with their situation. They should be upset with their parents because of decisions their parents made. Why don't you update that for us?
Well, yeah, and so you said, no, more than that, they have every right to be angry. They should be angry at their parents. I would update it to say they have every right to be angry. They should be angry at their parents and their grandparents. At their grandparents and their parents, rather, because we're not talking ancient history here, and it's funny how quickly 1948 becomes ancient history. But Israel has offered as recently as 2000 and 2008 to give the Palestinians everything they claim they want, which is a state in the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem. And in 2008, they were offered 100%. In other words, Israel would have retained 2% of the West Bank, 3% of the West Bank to accommodate the settlements. But in exchange for that, it would have given the Palestinians an equivalent amount of territory out of Israel proper. So we're talking in 2000 and 2008 offers for essentially all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, East Jerusalem. And in each case, they turned it down. In 2000, they turned it down violently by starting an intifada where suicide bombers killed over 1,000 Israelis, Arabs and Jews. In 2008, they turned it down just by saying no. So it just, again, if you don't like the occupation, if you don't like the settlements, do you have to necessarily point the finger of blame at Israel, or is it possible when you learn the history to say, okay, why didn't the Palestinians say yes? And in the absence of a yes from the Palestinians, why would Israel give up land that is so central to their security? When Israel withdrew every last Israeli citizen and soldier from Gaza in 2005, they didn't get peace in return. They got over 8,000 missiles and mortars fired from Gaza into southern Israel. The West Bank isn't overlooking southern Israel. It's overlooking central Israel, where over 70% of Israelis live, where Ben Gurion Airport is. If the same thing happened in the West Bank that happened in Gaza, you'd have missiles landing in the middle of Jerusalem, Ben Gurion Airport, and Tel Aviv every day. I think Israel has a right to say no thank you. We want a peace deal, an end to the conflict and security arrangements before we give you that opportunity.
So you think it would be misguided for Israel to simply say, okay, we're going to trust you this time around?
Yeah, and unfortunately, Michael, everyone looks today at Mahmoud Abbas, who unlike Yasser Arafat, his predecessor, is not tied to actively funding terrorist attacks against Israelis. The supposed partner for peace, Yasser Arafat, was funding suicide bombings of Israeli cafes and restaurants, not exactly a real partner for peace. Abbas, the current Palestinian president, is not tied to directly funding terror. He seems like a better man and a good man to make peace with. But we have to look at something. When Israel gave Gaza to Abbas in 2005, Hamas, a terrorist organization recognized as such not only by Israel but also by America and the European Union, took over from Abbas in a bloody coup very easily and very quickly and turned Gaza into one big terrorist camp, firing over 8,000 missiles into southern Israel. I think Israel needs to know that wouldn't be repeated again. If you look at the situation, say, in the West Bank, the only reason why Abbas is still in power is because Israel still goes into the West Bank to fight Hamas terror. If you remove Israel from the equation, most astute observers agree Hamas would easily take over the West Bank. You'd have the same situation. The strategic highland of Judea and Samaria would become a base from which missiles are easily fired down into the heart of Tel Aviv, the heart of Jerusalem, the heart of Ben Gurion Airport. Israelis aren't there because they like occupying, because they like conflict. They're there because the alternatives they face are not good alternatives. And Israel is doing what any other nation on earth would do, which is saying, we have an obligation to protect our citizens first and foremost, and we will only make great sacrifices for peace when we have some reason to believe they will actually achieve peace and not further endanger us.
And, you know, what we also have to look at in the larger picture here, and it's often frustrating because there is not a larger narrative that people are hearing and understanding. I've talked to Israeli soldiers that talk about the ethics training that they start with and how they can't even leave base without their ID and their ethics, their code of ethics, and the amount of effort that's made to not kill or hurt Palestinian civilians, and yet Israel being painted in these very, very harsh, broad, ugly brushstrokes. But let's talk about this other issue, the refugee issue. According to Arab Resolution 1457, which the Arab League passed in 1959, quote, the Arab countries will not grant citizenship to applicants of Palestinian origin in order to prevent their assimilation into the host countries. So many of my listeners know the story well. With the founding of the modern state of Israel in 1948, about 800,000 Jews were expelled from surrounding Arab and Muslim lands, and Israel absorbed the great majority of them. Some went to other places, but Israel absorbed the great majority of them. When it came to the Arabs that were living in the land, some fled because of the war. Some fled because they were urged to do so by the Arab leadership, telling them we'll drive the Jews in the sea and come back to your land. In any case, about 600,000 were displaced. About 200,000 remained in the land. But there was no effort by the surrounding Arab and Muslim nations to absorb them. In fact, the opposite was done. Even a resolution was passed. To this day, you go to a country like Lebanon and you have Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. So am I exaggerating this picture that the refugee problem is also largely due to the surrounding Muslim Arab nations saying we will not assimilate you?
It's absolutely due to that. It's true that Israel, people talk about how Israel expelled Arabs in 1948. They forget to mention one important fact, that to the extent Israeli troops were involved in expelling Arabs, it was a minority. Like you said, most fled a war. Some left at the urging of their own leaders. Some were expelled by Israeli troops in 1948. They just leave out one important part. It was part of a war that Israel didn't want, a war started by the Palestinian Arabs and then continued by 5 surrounding Arab nations to destroy Israel. And like in any war, in a war that the Israelis didn't want, they had to make some tough choices. When an Arab village was overlooking a vital road, they had to make sure that village couldn't be used as a place for the enemy to shoot at Israeli traffic and take Israeli territory. The war is to blame for the bitter fruit of the war. It was a war started by Palestinians and Arabs. Israel dared to fight back. Israel dared to survive. I have a hard time blaming Israel for the suffering on both sides. And like in any war, there was suffering on both sides. But what made this war different, which you point out, is in most wars when there are refugees, they're quickly resettled. Israel resettled its Jewish refugees. The Arabs were clear. They wanted to use these people as political pawns. The political point of having refugees was far more important to them than the humanitarian point of resettling people, giving them citizenship, and letting them continue their lives. It reminds me of the tactics of Hamas. which will hide its missiles in civilian buildings, fire its missiles from civilian buildings, and then cry to the world when Israel, in trying to take out the missiles, will harm a civilian building. They're not worried about human beings. They don't see every life as being in the image of God and being infinitely precious. They're more interested in sacrificing lives for the sake of their PR. It's done with refugees since 1948. Today it's done with civilians who are unfortunately stuck in a battlefield, not of Israel's choosing, but of Hamas's choosing.
Yeah. David, we come back. I want to ask one last question, an image that's often presented to make Israel look bad, and then let's move forward. What can we do to be proactive, to reverse any negative tide, and to push in the right direction in terms of standing with Israel?
Oh God of burning, cleansing flame, send the fire.
It's The Line of Fire with your host, Dr. Michael Brown, your voice of moral, cultural, and spiritual revolution. Here again is Dr. Michael Brown.
There can be no excuse for the illegal and arbitrary confiscation of furniture and household belongings.
While I was growing up, I thought it was the problem of the previous generation. After 67, I felt now it's become my issue.
They have their aims. Now it is very clear, very evident. They want all the land.
Don't come just to run where Jesus walked, but come to meet the living stones.
Right, that is from the movie The Stones Cry Out, a movie that is being watched at the Christ at the Checkpoint conference taking place in Bethlehem as I speak with my guest, David Brog, Executive Director of CUFI, Christians United for Israel, under the leadership of Pastor John Hagee. Reverend Alex Awad, one of the leaders of the conference in Bethlehem Bible College, said this uncritical support for the Israeli war machine and the settlement policies and the strong support for the war against Iraq and all the following U.S. wars based on theology is what I consider the spiritual captivity of the evangelical church. Due to their eagerness to fulfill biblical prophecy and their zeal and support for the secular state of Israel, many evangelical leaders slid off their God-given tracks. David, we've only got a few minutes, but I want to ask you three specific questions. First, just imagery. We hear about the occupation, the siege, apartheid, genocide, ethnic cleansing, horrific words like that. But then you'll see an image of a family watching as Israeli soldiers bulldoze their house. Why such extreme measures taken? You know, the security fence, the wall, that's one thing to keep the murderers out, but why bulldoze houses? I mean, what's the rationale behind that?
Well, again, and this is where good people can disagree, and good people do disagree. This is a hotly debated topic in Israel itself. The rationale is this, though, Michael, which is, how do you deter a suicide bomber? It used to be getting caught was a deterrent. It used to be, possibly getting shot while you're carrying out your terrorist mission was a disincentive. Someone wants to die, it's very hard to stop the terrorist bombing. So one method is to destroy their homes. They know that if they are commit a suicide bombing and kill innocent people, they'll be forcing their families to be homeless. And the hope is that's a deterrent. Ultimately, if we have to choose between human life and human possessions, I think choosing human life is the better choice. But who's forcing the choice? Who's strapping bombs to their bodies and wandering into cafes? It's a problem Israel would rather not have. But like so much of what they do, these Palestinians are showing Israel's responses to Palestinian violence without ever discussing the violence that necessitated the response.
Exactly. So you shot me in the leg, and I tackled you, and there's just a picture of me, a big guy, tackling you.
That's exactly right.
Right, so you don't shoot me again. All right, next question, and again, you could go on for hours with each of these, I'm sure, but just real short answer. You work with Pastor John Hagee. He teaches a lot about end-time prophecy. You work with many well-known Christian leaders around America and around the world. From your perspective, are these leaders doing what they're doing, standing with Israel, because they think this is a way to speed up biblical prophecy and kind of like actors in a movie, or are they doing it simply because they believe it's right to stand with Israel and they love the Jewish people?
because it's right to stand with Israel and they love the Jewish people. And anyone who thinks they're doing it to speed up the second coming of Jesus knows very little about Christianity and Christian theology. It's black letter Christian theology these days in a largely premillennial Christian world, that you can't speed the second coming by as much as a second. Human action cannot change God's timetable. Therefore, why does someone like Pastor Hagee or someone like you get out of bed in the morning and go to a pro-Israel rally? It can't be to speed the second coming. You believe you're powerless to do so. It clearly has to come from somewhere else. People confuse beliefs and motives too easily. It just shows an ignorance of Christianity. And frankly, Michael, I find that to be a slander of Christianity. When something done with a full heart and a lot of love is discredited like that.
Yeah, and in point of fact, I know the motivation because I ran into it when I first became a believer in Jesus, and the church just had this just gut level heart for Israel and love for the Jewish people, and it was just written on their hearts. And they thought things happening were very exciting, and that we were getting closer to the second coming.
As do some Jews who think it's the days of the Messiah.
Right. And surely, we go around the world, we preach the gospel. We believe it's important. The Great Commission has to be fulfilled before Jesus returns. But the idea that there's this, prophetic scenario, look, you know the people. I know the people. I just wanted to dispel that. Listen, Unfortunately, we are out of time, but take a minute. You ended your article with encouragement about what is happening. Let folks know some of what CUFI is successfully doing to educate people about Israel, especially on the college campuses.
Well, I appreciate it, Michael, and I just want to make a quick closing point as well. If you're a Christian who wants to support Israel, again, we're not a gospel-focused organization. We're an organization who says, do what you do religiously. Walk your Christian walk. But if you want to add to that walk education and action on behalf of Israel, speaking out on behalf of Israel before our leaders, and teaching the facts about Israel to our young people on campus or in the millennial evangelical world, Christians United for Israel is the organization that's leading that charge. We have over 1.6 million members. That's great, but it's nothing more than a good start. I just want to close with this thought, Michael, because I try not to get angry about this. Everyone is sort of focusing on Israel and blaming Israel. But we stand today, there's a great human rights tragedy playing out before our eyes today, and it is the extinction of some of the most ancient Christian communities in the world. Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and the Palestinian Authority-controlled territories in the West Bank. These Christian communities are being bombed, being shot at on their way to church, bombed while they're sitting in church. They're disappearing. This is a crisis, and in the middle of a human rights crisis like this, to see so-called Christians ignoring it, and instead taking valuable time, energy, and money to focus on some steps Israel takes to defend its citizens, Jewish, Arab, and Muslim, from Hamas and Hezbollah terrorism, to me is a terrible waste. If these people really care about Christians and Christian lives, why don't they speak out about the tragedy befalling the Christians of the Arab and Muslim world? The hypocrisy there and the wasted energy there that could be saving Christian lives, frankly, does make me angry.
Yeah, well, David, I believe in that case it's a righteous anger, and I share it. The good news is we can do something positive about it. Hey, got to run, but thanks for joining me on the air. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you.
All right. Friends, get educated. Find out. Tell me about Crusades. Tell me about the Inquisition. Tell me about how many Jews look at Jesus today. Do you know? Tell me the truth about Israel. Is Israel an evil occupier? The two resources, my book, Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, together with the DVD. It's 2 DVDs with Q&A at the University of South Florida's Israel an Evil Occupier. $25, postage paid. You'll also help us stand on the front lines of Jewish ministry. Order from my website, askdrbrown.org, askdrbrown.org, or write by calling 1-800-278-9978, 1-800-278-9978. My bottom line today, if you want to be on the side of justice in the Middle East, then you need to stand with Israel.